This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Paresa. Paresa, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Did you realize today is St. Patrick's Day?
Gosh, time is just flying so fast that honestly, no, I didn't. But happy St. Patrick's Day to you as well. It's a good day.
It is a good day. And I suppose when you're about to have a kid like you are, St. Patrick's Day is probably not the top of the list like some people might be. So
yeah,
bigger fish to fry, I suppose.
Not doing the Irish car bombs this year, but
Right, maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. Here in about a week or so, we're going to be welcoming our new little girl to the world. So taking it easy today, but still celebrating.
Well, good. Well, congratulations on that. And we've got a great show planned today. Speaking of luck, we're gonna talk about. Actually, it's a stretch to say this is speaking of luck, but I'll try it anyway. But organizational change management, we're going to talk about that today, which has nothing to do with luck. But if you'd rather not rely on luck and actually make a transformation successful, change management is a way to do that. I, for example, am very risk averse. I don't like gambling or taking huge risks. So change management is a great discussion for people like me that want to mitigate risk. And we're going to talk about what change management is and some of the best practices and lessons learned from two change management experts that are going to be on the show today. And then later in the show, we're going to have Daryl Crockett on the show, who's going to talk about, with you, Paresa, about women in leadership. And as I'm announcing the show here, I'm realizing that I am completely outnumbered. I am the only male on today's show, so I've got to figure out how to navigate that, being outnumbered. But it'll be a good show, so I'm excited for that. But before we jump into the change management discussion and women in leadership, you and I were talking recently about how consumer buying behavior has changed and some of the post-pandemic permanent shifts that we're seeing in the way people behave. What are some of your thoughts there?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a given, right? 2020 put a lot of stress on a lot of people, which will directly impact the way that they shop. And I saw an article on Forbes that was talking about how in 2021 specifically, buyer behavior is shifting more toward products that will make you feel comfortable at home, which makes complete sense, right? I mean, we're now using our homes for a place of work, a place of school, and a place of leisure and relaxing, right? So a lot of the theory is that home goods, for example, so home decor, candles, air fresheners, house plants, even things that you could do to get creative and do some at-home hobbies, those types of goods are on the rise. And then when you look at clothing specifically, the retailers that are out there selling clothing or producing clothing should prioritize loungewear, because loungewear is up 13 times compared to last year. Sweatshirts 10 times, athleisure, which I think is like a cross between workout clothes but still clothes that you could wear normally, up 3 times. So I mean, it's interesting to see the pivot, and it makes sense, right? Everybody's on their Zoom calls. Nobody sees like what kind of pants are you wearing. So you could wear your pajama pants really all day long and nobody would know.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's interesting how the apparel industry has just shifted so much in that way. My wife shops at Lululemon. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a place I swore I would never shop, and I always thought it was funny when men would buy clothes there. And she bought me some things there recently that are awesome. Like, I just love the clothes, but they're like, the style is sort of athletic, but sort of like I have a pair of pants that's meant to be athletic, but it sort of looks like jeans. They're super cool, really comfortable. So it's interesting to see how a lot of those apparel brands have shifted so much, in addition to obviously the consumer behavior.
You know, that might be the exact same pair of pants I bought my husband too.
Really?
So it's funny to see it showing up in our own our own buyer behavior, I guess, right? Because I mean, for me, it's exactly true. I'm looking for clothes that are comfortable. When I'm shopping for my husband, same thing. What's comfortable, but still, presentable and not looking like a scrub during the day, right? But it's
Right.
showing across the board. And it's one other stat that they shared was retailers that are using the word cozy in their product description, their sales year over year from 2019 to 2020 was up 9% just by using that word. Isn't that
Wow.
interesting?
That's super interesting. It's just a subtle little trigger or cue, I guess, for people. Maybe people are
Yeah,
looking for comfort in today's day and age. It's just comforting to hear that word, I suppose.
that's right. They want to be cozy. So if you are a retailer that sells clothes, make sure to use the word cozy in your clothes, and you'll
Yeah,
drive some more sales.
there's 9% right there just by switching
Hmm.
that one word.
That's right. The other thing that they mentioned, which I didn't think about but makes complete sense, is that back to school shopping is now a year round thing. They're expecting all of 2021, the typical school supplies, you have the pencils, the notebooks, etc., but it is now expanding into products like webcam covers and lighting features and organizers and things that kind of are beyond the scope of regular school supplies and supporting that virtual learning aspect. So I'm curious, I mean, did your kids are in middle school, high school age, right?
Uh, I should know this faster than it's taking me to remember this. One's in fifth grade and one is in eighth grade.
Okay, so 5th and 8th grade. So I imagine you guys experienced the whole at home learning aspect in virtual school. Is that right?
Yeah, we still are a bit. The younger one's back in school full time, but the older one is half and half. So we still have to fight over bandwidth and space and all that good stuff.
Right. So do you see that showing up for you guys? Do you buy more of the school supplies kind of year round rather than just in say August when the school year kicks off?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially because their schools have stuff in the summer as well, or during the
Mm.
the off times. So plus the like you said, the fact that you're just home all the time, it just puts more pressure on you to buy those supplies.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're not alone. A lot of people are experiencing the same thing. So that's another area of opportunity. If you're a retailer, start selling some school supplies. Make some
Yeah,
money.
yeah. It makes me wonder too with some of these trends you're talking about with the comfort at home and the school shopping or back to school shopping year round. It makes me think of when you have technology that it does predictive analytics or looks at seasonal trends or tries to predict demand so that manufacturers and distributors can fulfill that demand. It makes me wonder what kind of impact that's had on analytics and things that may have been predictable or may have been reliable in the past, but suddenly aren't so reliable given the fact that the world's changed so much. So I don't have an answer for you. It's more of a question, but that's an interesting thought as far as related back to what you were saying here.
Right. How does the business intelligence factor play into your data? Right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And is there a way to model some of the stuff you're talking about? Is there enough data, either historically, to predict the future, or is there some other sort of modeling that this technology can do? And I haven't seen it yet, but I suspect there probably is good technology out there that can help do that.
Right. I imagine. Because another area of opportunity that this article was talking about is that people are experiencing analysis paralysis more than ever when it comes to making a simple decision on which item to buy. It sounds like, when people are adding things to their cart and they can't decide between a couple different products, they just tap out and don't buy anything. So I'm curious, can an ERP system or, different business intelligence technologies help identify this and like aid your follow-up process to make sure that if people are leaving items in their cart that it's not a lost opportunity?
Yeah, yeah. There's ways that technology can identify and either report on or trigger some sort of workflow that's automated that will allow you to follow up with people that may have abandoned their cart or maybe they viewed an item but they didn't put it in their cart. Good e-commerce and ERP technology can help you do that. And so, that's where it's a good point. As you're talking about that, this whole concept of analysis paralysis, because you think about all the lost sales as a result of that analysis paralysis, and so I think companies that sell to consumers need to think about, and even companies that sell to businesses, by the way, need to be thinking about how do we change our technology and our processes to really maybe follow up in a different way or more aggressively or more frequently than you might have otherwise in the past.
Absolutely. So I'd say 2 tips for 2021, or the rest of the year, I should say, is if you have products that can kind of sway toward these trends, then rebranding it, tweaking one word in your product description, doing those little things could help you drive more sales this year. And 2, make sure that your ERP systems and your technology is up to date and helping you in the new direction that we're going.
Yeah, and maybe 3 would be just how do you tweak or modify your processes and technologies so you're not looking backward at historic data and trends that maybe aren't relevant today, and how can you use those workflows and technologies to look more to the future and try and anticipate what you need in terms of satisfying consumer demand or addressing your supply chain or determining how much product to manufacture or whatever your business might be that might be affected by this in some way. There's ways around that with technology, business processes, and overall transformation like we talk about often on this show.
That's right. The people leading the front are the ones that are adapting and changing regardless of how quickly it happens, right?
Yep, absolutely. Well, good. Well, appreciate that update there. And it's an interesting trend for sure. A few data points there that I was not aware of. So speaking of change, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to have Sarah and Tammy from the Third Stage team. Tammy is from Third Stage here in the U.S. Sarah is from Third Stage, our office in the U.K. and Europe. And they're both going to answer some questions about change management. We're going to dive into what change management is and how to get started on your change journey, what some of the major workflows or activities are you should be thinking about. So we'll have sort of an informal interview with them talking about change management when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back. Are you ready for transformation in 2021? Are you ready for change? Well, we want to help ensure that you're ready at Digital Stratosphere on April 20 through April 22nd. Digital Stratosphere is the only technology agnostic event of its kind, and we're bringing it to you digitally. This unique event is intended for anyone about to go through any sort of transformation, whether it be a digital transformation or a business transformation. This event is going to cover topics from experts ranging from strategy to planning, to program management, to change management, to technology, everything you need to know to make your transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. And if you're one of the over 1,000 people that attended one of our past Digital Stratosphere events, this one promises to be bigger, better, and even more stratospheric. And the best part is that because this event coincides with Third Stage's 3-year anniversary, we're providing the first day of keynote sessions to you with no registration fee. And if you would like to attend all 3 days of the conference, we've provided deep discounts to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. So bring your entire team to Digital Stratosphere and get ready for transformation. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm Eric Kimberling here with Paresa Noble. We're live on YouTube every Wednesday at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. London time, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong time. And you can also subscribe and find us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcast, all your favorite podcast platforms. You can find us there as well. And our next guest, I'm very excited for. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart, organizational change management. That's actually where I started my career as a change management consultant. It's an area I'm still very interested in. It's an area we focus on at Third Stage Consulting. So I'm excited to have 2 of our change leaders within Third Stage here on the show, answering questions about change and how to get started on your change management journey and just understanding it a bit more and how it fits into your overall transformation. So with me today, I have Tammy Foshee and Sarah Stanley-Smith, who are 2 of our change management experts on the Third Stage team. Tammy is from here in the United States, where Paresa and I are based, and Sarah is based out of our UK office for our European market. So, Tammy and Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Sure. So, I guess to start, and maybe I'll start with you, Tammy, on this first question, and then have Sarah build on this. But I guess the first question for you is, how would you define change management? It can mean a lot of different things to different people. It's a term that's often overused, misused. Technical integrators often have their own definition of what they think change management is. Maybe it's training, communication, or other things. But maybe just if we back up a little bit and just talk about change management in general, how would you define it?
Sure. I think I would define change management as applying a structured approach or methodology to moving people through change, whether that's at the individual, the team, or the organizational level. So I like to compare it to the way that, project management runs a project. It's a purposeful, structured approach, and that's what change management is to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. How about you, Sarah? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I likewise think it's kind of the organized transition to new ways of working. To kind of build on that, I kind of like to view it in terms of sort of four key areas. So it's that transition phase to a new way of working across processes, technology, structure, and skills. But then kind of underpinning or overpinning all of that is kind of the focus on people specifically. So how do people move through that transition? And it's kind of sort of helping smooth that transition and make it as sort of easy as possible for people to adopt the new ways of working.
Right. Now, if we look at any sort of digital transformation or business transformation, obviously there's a big impact to people. But what do you think makes change management so important? When you compare it to, call it the technical aspects of a transformation or the business process aspects or any other aspect. Why is the change management piece so important? Maybe what are your thoughts, Sarah?
Well, so for me, I think that without people, you don't have a project, right? So you can have, the world's leading technology, sort of all shiny, singing, dancing, all that kind of thing. But if you don't have the people there who are able to use the technology effectively and efficiently, there's no point in having it, right? You might well as just, not have bothered. So I think that's where change management really comes into its own, because we're talking about people and helping people through that process, and getting them to embed their new ways of working in order to support the technology that's coming in. So I kind of think without that change management piece, yes, you've got great technology, but you're not able to use it and sort of see the benefits of it.
Yeah, it becomes shelfware or technology that's there, but it's not being used. You're not getting the value out
Yeah,
of it.
exactly.
Yeah. How about you, Tammy? What are your thoughts on that?
To piggyback on what Sarah said, I think if you sort of go through this process to configure and build, the leading, best class technology, but you don't do the change management piece, you're going to have impacts to productivity. But on top of that, you're also going to have the frustration of the users who haven't been prepared, aren't ready to use it, don't understand, the direction that the business is moving in. And so any potential ROI or benefits you expected to achieve have literally gone out the window because you forgot the most important part, which is, preparing the people that will be using the technology. The technology is just a tool at the end of the day.
Yeah, in hearing you guys talk, it almost, and I'm trying to step back and not be biased because I started my career as a change management consultant as well. And, I certainly see the value and believe it's critical to any project. But even if I step back and just listen to your responses, it seems like a no-brainer, even if I didn't have that bias. So why do you think so many companies have trouble seeing the value in change management? Or why don't more people recognize how important change management is? Do you guys have a thought on that?
Yeah, I guess for me, there's a couple of things there. I think sort of number one, it's kind of fairly new in terms of a discipline compared to some of the other disciplines that we deal with. So I think there's still quite a lot of learning that people who aren't kind of deeply involved in change management perhaps need to go through. And I also think, obviously, with any kind of large scale project, there's always tight budgets and there's time constraints. And I often think that change management's seen by people who don't understand it as sort of a nice to have, or if we have time, let's do it. If we have some money left over, let's try and do it, rather than saying, actually, this is kind of a critical kind of linchpin to your program. So I think there's kind of a bit of a lack of education and awareness through people who perhaps don't understand it in as much detail because they're not as involved.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd never thought about the maturity or the fact that it's a relatively new discipline and it hasn't been around as long as some of the other work streams that we commonly work with. So that's a really good point. What are your thoughts, Tammy?
I think the other challenge is that it takes so long to actually see the benefits of a change management program, right? You layer this on top of an initiative and you basically have to get to the point where the change becomes business as usual, and then you monitor the success of that change for, a certain period of time, maybe in your hypercare state. And it's not until then that you're sort of realizing the value of what you did. So I think the delay between, the level of effort that you have to put into it to implement it, the delay of how long it takes to actually see the value of the level of effort and the investment that you put forth. Because of that delay, I think it's sometimes hard to convince people who want some of that instant gratification.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It also seems like during these sorts of transformations, if I'm implementing new technology, I can see and touch and feel the technology. I know if it's working or not. It's pretty black and white for the most part. Either it works or it doesn't. And that's one piece. And then on the operational side, I can look at a process flow and I kind of know, I can see where there could be a problem with that process flow. But the change management stuff, I can't see it, I can't touch it, I can't feel it. And by the time I do feel it, it's usually at go live, post go live. And it seems like that's another part of it, is how do you, and I don't know if you have a good answer for this or not, but how do you get someone to feel the pain sooner of not having good change management? Because it takes, to your point, Tammy, it takes so long for people to realize the value. And on the flip side, it takes so long to feel the pain of not having addressed change management.
Mhm. I guess could kind of answer that a little bit. I always like to use examples of where projects have failed, where they haven't had the change management as kind of that example. Because if you can kind of relate it to a similar project, maybe that you've heard about, or a colleague's been involved in, for example, and you can explain, this is what happened, and if we had change management up front and we had done X, Y, and Z, we could have mitigated that before it had, sort of derailed the project, as it were. So I think it's really good to kind of use some real life examples in that scenario, and just kind of try and really sell the benefits to people early on. So it's kind of people are bought into the whole change management workstream piece.
Yeah, it's a good point. You have to kind of illustrate the what ifs. What if we don't do change management? What does that look like? And what have other companies experienced that haven't invested in change management? What are your thoughts, Tammy?
Yep. I think another way to look at it is also to really look at the change and kind of break it down. How much of the success of this change is dependent on people behaving differently or in new ways. And when you can look at it that way, and you can sort of explain the continuum that people go through when they're experiencing a change, I think you can bring some of that, to the surface, so people can really start aligning, the success of this project not only depends on appropriately configured technology, but it also depends on, individuals who are knowledgeable and ready and willing to work, in new ways in the future state.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys ever see the dynamic, or with our clients? Do you ever see situations where the client says, "Hey, yeah, I get it that other organizations have struggled with change management, but our people are different. They're on board with this change. They're excited for it. They understand that the old way isn't going to get us to the future. And therefore, I think we're worrying about a whole lot about nothing, because change management is not going to be a big deal for us." Do you ever run into that?
Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times actually, and I think sometimes it's a kind of people almost reassuring themselves that, yeah, it's fine, we've got this, our people are great, and it's quite a dangerous assumption to make, because until you've really uncovered the culture and the nuances within a business, and you've actually gone and spoken to the end users, you don't actually understand how they're feeling and their understanding of change management. And I think even in the best will of will in the world, if everybody's really up for the change and they're really excited and they're really on board, and there's none of that resistance initially, when you actually get into the nitty gritty and you actually start asking people to do stuff, that's outside of their business as usual jobs or their roles, and you're actually asking for people's time and commitment as part of the program, the change resistance then tends to arise, and it starts to appear and cracks start to show, and that's when you can really start to see projects actually derailing because of it. So I think sometimes people kind of lure themselves into a false sense of security that, yeah, it's great because our people are great. But until you've done that discovery piece and you've actually done that investigation, you can't be sure that that's the case. So yeah, I found that a couple of times, and it's quite scary to watch, really.
Mm. Yeah, in no amount of educating or case studies sometimes will help those situations or those instances where they have that false sense of security. How about you, Tammy? Have you seen something similar in your career?
Absolutely. I actually think this is probably one of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to organizations and their approach to organizational change is this over assumption that they know how their stakeholders feel, and basically applying a generalized idea of how supportive, the stakeholders will be. And I think every circumstance that I've been in where an organization tells me, oh, everyone, we've had the same ERP system for 20 years. Everybody's ready for a new UI. Everybody loves change. Everyone's excited. You get into it, and that quote unquote everyone is a subset of 10 or 12 people that this person works directly with. And when you really look at the organization as a whole, that's when you really start to basically peel the layers of the onion back, and you do start to see some of that resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of drawing out that potential resistance to change early on before it's felt or before the client necessarily sees it. Just being able to anticipate that can be very powerful. So what do you see as some of the biggest pitfalls when embarking on a change management program or when helping our clients through change management programs? Why don't we start with you, Tammy?
Definitely the lack of an understanding of the role of sponsorship and modeling behaviors. I think a lot of organizations think sponsorship is I'm going to sign my name to some emails and I'm going to host a town hall. But the more important thing to me, from my experience when it comes to sponsorship, is truly modeling those change behaviors, right? So I was in technology implementation where the CEO was actually one of the sponsors, and we hosted a town hall event with actually about 400 people. This was pre-COVID, so everybody was in this huge auditorium. And he got up there and he was showing how he would log his own expense report, log his own time. And to me, that went, leaps and bounds for getting the rest of the organization on board, especially because those tasks were traditionally sort of passed on to admin assistants. And now there was this desire to sort of move to a culture of ownership of your own responsibilities. And him getting up there and sponsoring the change and modeling those behaviors, I think went really, really far. And I think that's something that is a huge pitfall, because a lot of executives are very busy and they'll sign their name to the sponsorship role without really understanding what it means to be active, visible, and vocal.
Yeah, that's a good point. How about you, Sarah? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of linked really, but I think for me one of the sort of key challenges is often, especially when you go into big organizations, there's kind of this misalignment of goals and vision. So you often get quite a lot of senior leaders within a company who all want to change, but they all want to change slightly differently. So you end up with sort of 10 senior people all kind of pushing and driving in slightly different directions. And then you kind of have this sort of level of middle managers who are trying to please their seniors, but kind of being pushed and pulled in different directions. And you end up going around in a big circle. and nothing gets achieved, and you get very frustrated people. So I think it's super important that, you know, everybody is kind of aligned and agreed on the goals and the vision really early on, and we all know where we're driving to. Because yeah, it's quite comical really, but it just goes round and round and round, and people get more frustrated and more fatigued, and it just doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. And it's you know, a lot of it comes back to leading by example and starting at the top. I mean, I think ultimately you need the people at the top to drive and support the change in order for it to stick and for other people to follow.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually then on the flip side, you know, obviously we're talking top down. If you think about the bottom up level, I think sometimes we fail to answer, you know, what's in it for me? That question that people, you know, who are right on sort of the coal face, as it were, those end users who are actually going through the system changes and actually changing how they work. I think if the program fails to say, okay, so why is this important for that person? What, you know, they're kind of sat there thinking, why should I bother? You're asking me to do all this stuff and attend all these workshops and give you all this information, but what am I getting out of it? You know, so I think it's really important to make sure you kind of cover that off with, especially sort of groups of people that maybe kind of get forgotten until right at the last minute, by which point it's too late anyway.
Right. That's a good point.
I was just going to say, Eric, to Sarah's point, you know, something that I've actually recently seen in the organizational change sort of network of thought leadership is this concept of, you know, once you've established the what's in it for me, making sure that you also have established the what's in it for us. Because sometimes there are changes that don't necessarily have a direct benefit on an individual, but they're going to have a direct benefit on a team or the organization as a whole. And you have to be able to sort of paint that bigger picture, because there's a lot of sort of identity built up with the employee within the organization. So I think, you know, what's in it for me has a long history in change management. And I think what's in it for us is sort of up and coming as its little sister or big brother, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I have a few more questions for you that relate to more call it the tactical side of change management, and how you've actually executed some of these change programs in the past, and how one might get started on the change program, and a number of other questions. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Tammy and Sarah from the Third Stage team talking about organizational change management. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
And if Saturday don't come soon, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Sarah and Tammy from Third Stage Consulting. We're talking about organizational change management. And before the break, we were talking a bit about some of the different work streams or activities that happen on a change management project typically. But what about the team itself and how a change team should be structured? What are some of the best practices you guys have seen in those cases? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
So generally, yeah, sure. So generally, the sort of clients and the projects that I've been involved in, especially if they're big companies, you know, and they've got sort of matrix organizations and it's global. In the past, I've seen you tend to have a change lead or a change director, so somebody who's accountable for the whole work stream. And in my experience, they tend to work side by side with the program director. So you've got that program focus and the change focus at that senior level. Then sort of sat underneath that, I tend to find that you have a number of business change managers who are doing the sort of core business change activity. And then if the program's got the luxury of having enough resource, you tend to have communications managers and training managers sat alongside them, because in my experience at least, training and communications obviously are part of change, but they're specialised disciplines in their own right. So it's always good if you can have those managers in those positions that work alongside the change manager. And then obviously those resources are allocated out to different projects within the program, and you tend to work alongside your business analysts and solution architects and your project managers. So you have sort of separate project teams within that program structure. And that tends to be what I've seen work, and it tends to work quite well.
Right. How about you, Tammy? Have you seen anything different or any other ways that you've seen it work beyond what Sarah mentioned?
I think she described a great structure. The only thing I would add is, maybe the two ancillary sort of teams, which is the sponsorship of the project and sort of that change champion network that you would engage.
So I agree with you, Sarah and Tammy. That structure you just described, we've seen work really well at a lot of clients. In fact, most clients, it's worked well. We've had some clients, though, that have taken more of a in-house approach to change management, or they've wanted to integrate change management more into the operations and embedding it within what the project team might do or what the operational leads might do. Have you seen that work in the past, or what are some of the pros and cons of an approach like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's...
You go, Tammy.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just gonna say, I think it's a great approach to really want to embed that, change management capability within the organization. And I think it can be successful on smaller projects, but when you have larger sort of transformational type projects with far-reaching impacts, I think you really need the expertise of a well-built capability and a mature capability that most organizations haven't reached, since it's relatively new to want to embed that capability in the organization.
Right.
I completely agree. I think there are pros and cons to the approach. Where I've seen it not work so well is if, say, like you say, Tammy, you've got quite a big program or project you need to deliver, and the change management is divvied up between your sort of business as usual type people. They often have their day job to do as well as their project role. And often, obviously, you get conflicting priorities, and people say, actually, I'm really sorry, I just don't have time to do the change management. And that's a real sort of hiccup that I've seen happen in the past, and it just becomes a nice to have and it gets forgotten about.
Yeah, it becomes easy to just assume that if I have to pick something to drop, I'm not going to drop the technology or the functional piece of it. I'm going to make sure that works, and I'm probably just going to drop change management. And it seems like a big part of this because you don't see or feel the impact of that right away, but you do see or feel the impact of not configuring a software solution or not defining a business process. You can see and touch that right away, but the change management percolates when you were neglected, and then it blows up at some point later on. So that's a good point.
When it's time to use the system.
Right. Yeah, exactly. When you go live and you post go live, that's when you really feel the pain of change management. And that's a big problem, I think, with just selling change management to a team, or emphasizing the importance to an executive team is, it's just hard to feel that pain early enough in the process.
Yeah, I always use the analogy of life insurance. It's definitely like life insurance for your project. And, that's something that we purchase, we invest in, to make sure that the people are taken care of when we are no longer here. And it's the same thing with change management. We have to invest and take care of the people to make sure when you go live, all the investment that you've made in that system or whatever that change is actually going to be able to be realized.
Right. Now, what about some of the change management challenges you guys have seen in your careers? Do you have a certain a case study or a client or a project, or maybe a particular example or situation that you feel was either the biggest or one of the biggest change management challenges you faced in your career? Why don't we start with you, Tammy?
Well, I would actually say on a project during COVID that was, going really well, great change management approach and strategy. And of course, the project sort of went on pause. And when the project picked back up, the executive team was really trying to sort of balance out message saturation. And of course, the COVID messaging took priority. And so this idea of preparedness and readiness for the organization for everything that we were working on took a back seat. And, we really sort of turned the corner with that, with some focused interviews and some readiness assessments to really say, people are getting this information from the news, from their healthcare providers, from their families, and from work. And knowing that the organization is continuing with the project and continuing to communicate and prepare them actually gave them a source of comfort that was unexpected. So it was extremely challenging to convince, the leadership team of that. But I think that's where having the data can match up with sort of what some people view as the softness of change management to change minds.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Sarah? What's an example or of a situation that was particularly tough from a change perspective, either a situation or a client that you worked with?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I tend to think all change programs are challenging, but there's one particular one that kind of sticks out for me. We were working as part of a sort of digital transformation team of contractors at a global car manufacturer. And there were two sort of key challenges with this particular client. The first one, that the organizational structure was highly devolved. So you essentially had loads of pockets of people, almost, I kind of describe it as sort of 10 or 12 companies under this, company banner. They were all operating on their own systems, using their own processes. They weren't talking to each other, and it was a complete mess, to be honest. So that was the key sort of first challenge that we had. And the second one was sort of business as usual continuity. So essentially, if we broke any piece of that puzzle, the cars would stop being produced, stop coming off the line. And the senior guys, as part of that company, were saying, well, we can actually translate that to how many millions of pounds per hour we're losing, and that's the knock-on effect. So hugely challenging, hugely scary. But the way we got around that was, well, firstly, we had a really strong change lead who kind of had a grip on what actually needed to be done and how we were going to do it. So we had a good upfront, sort of robust strategy in place. And the second bit was we had a really lengthy discovery phase. So we kind of sold it that, obviously we can't break anything. And in order to not break anything, we have to understand everything first. So it was quite a hard sell, because obviously discovery costs money. But essentially it was, right, okay, we need to work out exactly what we're dealing with here, what systems, what processes, what people, etc. That's kind of how we got around it. But it was huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, those are both interesting examples, sort of different examples, but a good reflection of the diverse challenges that come up during a change initiative, especially in a COVID environment too. You get some good points there, Tammy, about how to manage that soft side of change in a more digital, remote environment that a lot of us are operating in. How have you seen change management stay in sync? Or let me back up and rephrase the question. How do you suggest that companies keep their change initiative in sync with some of the operational improvements and the technical work streams and all the different pieces of transformation that happen? What are some high level tips you would provide to a team to help them keep their change management activities in sync? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
So something I've seen that works quite well is having a dedicated change management board, almost. So, you have your key players from each of those areas that you describe, and they're all sat on a specific change management board. So I'm talking something that's separate from your program board, separate from your steering committee, separate from your high level exec board. So it's a dedicated forum where we talk about all the change management going on, and we incorporate all of those different pieces and take it into consideration when we do anything. But you really do have to involve all those key stakeholders, because for the best will in the world, you don't know what's going on unless you actually ask people.
Right. Yeah. How about you, Tammy? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the similar structure, something that I've seen work really well is the concept of a community of practice, with the change team and representation from generally the strategy or transformation side of the business. And I think a real key point here is actually making sure you're including the functional areas that are enabling the business to generate their revenue, right? So that's IT, HR, which are traditionally seen as, cost centers, but truthfully in today's world, they've been transitioning for a while, and I think they continue to evolve at a pretty rapid pace to be more of seats at the table, because they really are enabling the business. So really, I think a previous customer, they generated this community of practice, and they met every 2 weeks actually, just to make sure nothing slipped by them, and they were very proactive and prepared.
Yeah, that's good feedback and good advice. And speaking of advice, if we back up even more and just talk about how to get started, if I'm a executive or project team member that's on a transformation or planning for a transformation, what's the best way to get started in the process? What do you think, Tammy?
To get started in a process, obviously once you have identified the need for change and understand and appreciate that, I think alignment and setting expectations for me is the most important. To Sarah's point about her example earlier about a challenging change, every project that I'm on, the executive team, has a demand of limit impacts to our productivity. And I always meet that with, okay, well, let's set some realistic expectations and make sure that we're all aligned on, the activities that we can do, the timeline is realistic, access to the people, the team, the leadership, and the decision makers are realistic. And I think if you can start with that and gain agreement on all of those things, then you're really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. You had several really good points there that we could further unpack maybe on a future conversation. What about you, Sarah? Anything you'd add to that as far as how do I get started? What do I do to just really start to launch my change initiative within my transformation?
Yeah, so I think completely agree with what Tammy says, and again, reiterating that understanding the challenge that you have. Once you have that understanding, I think it's really important that you fully resource your change team, because too often we say, oh, we'll just start with maybe a couple of resources and see how we get on, whereas a lot of the bulk of the work is done up front. So make sure you have adequate resources. Don't skimp on change management.
Right. And then last question for you both. It's kind of a loaded question, but ideally, when should change management start on a transformation? Who wants to answer that?
ASAP.
Yesterday.
Yep.
If you're thinking transformation, you should have already thought change management.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think loads of times I've seen cases where the change manager, sometimes myself, have been brought in far too late, and you're kind of playing catch up constantly. You're always one step behind the curve, and it's not helpful for anybody. So always good to be involved up front.
Yeah. In fact, Sarah, even I had a conversation today with a client that is about 4 or 5 months behind. And I guess on one hand, you say better late than never, but you're better off starting it sooner than you think. And a lot of companies think, well, let's get through the design phase first, then we'll get to the change management stuff once we know all the details of the change impacts and all that stuff. But even then, you're still behind the 8 ball at that point in terms of timing.
And I would say the thing I think people often forget is change management is different than every other work stream because it crosses all work streams. If you think of a technology implementation, right? You've got functional work streams, you've got security, you've got IT, but change management actually hits every single one of those because there are people in every single one of those that are going to be impacted by the change. So, and I think that's something people overlook and they try to sort of bucket it into, well, it is its own work stream. Well, I like to say it is the umbrella that sits atop all of the other work streams, right next to project management.
Yeah, that's a great point, a great place to leave it because, I always, myself included, others a lot of times will think of the PMO as kind of that overarching umbrella, but really, I know you said change management could sit next to the PMO or next to the program management. You could argue the change management should really be the thing that everything reports up to or kind of feeds up to, because it is, everything does involve change. And you mentioned before, Tammy, everything from, the direct operations to HR to IT, there's a lot of impact throughout the organization. So it's definitely an important discipline and one that makes it so cool, so much fun at the same time that it's misunderstood. So I think you guys have done a good job of hopefully helping the audience understand a little bit more about change management and why it's important and how to go about it. So thank you both for being on the show today. Really appreciate having you.
Likewise.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll be right back with more from Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
I look around but I can never see a way out of this place for me. How can I tell her?
Are you ready for transformation in 2021? Are you ready for change? Well, we want to help ensure that you're ready at Digital Stratosphere on April 20 through April 22nd. Digital Stratosphere is the only technology agnostic event of its kind, and we're bringing it to you digitally. This unique event is intended for anyone about to go through any sort of transformation, whether it be a digital transformation or a business transformation. This event is going to cover topics from experts ranging from strategy to planning, to program management, to change management, to technology, everything you need to know to make your transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. And if you're one of the over 1,000 people that attended one of our past Digital Stratosphere events, This one promises to be bigger, better, and even more stratospheric. And the best part is that because this event coincides with Third Stage's 3-year anniversary, we're providing the first day of keynote sessions to you with no registration fee. And if you would like to attend all 3 days of the conference, we've provided deep discounts to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. So bring your entire team to Digital Stratosphere and get ready for transformation.
Unless we try it, we'll never know. Unless we ride it, we'll never grow. Unless we try it, we'll never know. Unless we ride it, we'll never grow. I think I'm ready now. I think I'm ready. I'm ready. I think I'm ready now. Hear 1,000 times. 1,000 times. 1,000 times.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Paresa Noble. You can find us on social media. Be sure to follow Third Stage and myself, Eric Kimberling. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, where we're very active in social media discussions. You can also follow us or subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook as well. So be sure to engage with us there for more content like this, as well as other stuff that we put out there on a daily basis. So, Paresa, we just chatted about change management with Tammy and Sarah. What were some of your observations about change management and just some of the lessons that they provided here in today's discussion?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite topics because it's an intangible piece, right? You can't see it. You can't really, you can't touch it, but it weighs so much and it plays such a huge role in the success of a digital transformation. So I thought it was very interesting, and their perspectives went a long way. I think Tammy made a point that stood out to me about how people really want instant gratification. So that's sometimes why they may overlook pouring into an organizational change management strategy from the get-go. But it literally makes or breaks the project. I mean, you could have the leading technology, right? But if you don't have people behind it operating it the correct way, then you don't have much, right? So I guess my question is, I'm curious, you guys talked a lot about start as soon as possible. Before, if you start thinking about going on a digital transformation journey, you should have already started thinking about organizational change management. So you start early. Is the finish line go live for organizational change management, or is there some best practices around what you do after go live as well, to make sure that your team is adjusting to the new technology?
Yeah, it's a great observation. It does not end at go live, or it shouldn't end at go live. I think, unfortunately, so many projects and project teams think of it as a finite, finishing point or whatever the case may be. But the reality is a couple things. One is that usually when you go live, that's oftentimes the most disruptive and the most risky time within your transformation. So more than ever at any other point in the project, that's when you need change management the most, just if anything, just to help stabilize processes and operations and people's sanity and morale and all that good stuff. But beyond that, even if you look past the initial first few weeks or months after go live, there's an opportunity to continuously improve and optimize what you just implemented. And it always fascinates me how the dynamic of how organizations will spend millions of dollars on these big transformation projects, and then they just do nothing after go live. They're done. And maybe they provide a little bit of hypercare support or change management support after go live, but then they sort of taper off and they just go on their merry ways, forget about technology for a while until 10 or 20 years go by, and they realize our system is totally misaligned with how we've grown as a business, and they're back in the same situation where they feel like they need new technology. So if you do it right, to answer your question, the change management should extend definitely past go live, and even, I would argue, more of a continuous improvement sort of approach to where it really never ends.
Yeah, ongoing. I mean, that makes sense. I'm curious, what would you say is like one tactic that you could do during the transformation, and how does it differ from the tactic that you would do after go live? Like, how do they compare? What are some things that are different between the strategies?
Yeah, so before go live, if you start it early enough, generally what you're doing is you're assessing the culture in the organization and trying to anticipate where the resistance to change or where the change management obstacles might come from. Because it's almost like a tip of the iceberg type of thing where, when you're an executive or even on a project team, you see maybe just some minor signs of resistance or organizational issues, and that's the tip of the iceberg. But as you go further down the path of the transformation, you get further into it and you're starting to change processes and roles and responsibilities, and then you start communicating those changes. That's where the resistance and the confusion and the chaos organizationally starts to happen. So the key is, can we start it soon enough, to your point? Can we start change management early enough in the cycle to where we can anticipate what those potential issues may be based on the type of company it is and the culture and some of that other stuff? But then just as importantly, what can we prescribe in a prescriptive way to address those proactively? So it's more of a strategic, proactive approach to change management, and that's what's happening early in the project. But then when you get to go live, a lot of times it's more, I hate to say it, but it's a little bit more of the reactive. You're looking at what didn't we catch, or what issues did we not anticipate, or maybe we didn't address well enough, or we need to do more. So for example, a lot of times you find after go live that there's certain processes that aren't working right, or people aren't doing their job right because either they haven't been trained appropriately, so there's some refresher training that might need to happen, or a business process exception wasn't well defined in the early stages of the project. It could be that the software has a problem that wasn't configured right, so you've got to reconfigure the software. So a lot of times it's more root cause analysis of why are we having these issues, and it actually goes, I would argue, even beyond change management. It's more of a benefits optimization sort of exercise that's pretty heavy on the change management side, because that's usually where most of the problems are. So I'd say the biggest difference is that proactive strategic view that happens early on, and then later post go live, usually you're getting more into a reactive problem solving type of mode.
Right. That makes complete sense. So, okay, looking at the proactive side, I'm curious about resistance, and you guys talked a little bit about it during your conversation, but I'm curious, how can you be proactive and capture the unintentional resistance, and kind of, plan for that when you don't, the people who are showing the resistance or will show the resistance don't even realize that they're opposed to it. So how are you supposed to know? How can you identify resistance like that?
Well, you're hitting on a really common misconception about change, human behavior, and people's resistance to change. I think when people think of change management issues or even resistance to change, they think of something blatant like Eric just doesn't want this change to happen, or Eric's digging at his heels because he doesn't want to see this transformation be successful. And usually that's not the case. I mean, you certainly have a few exceptions within any organization where someone is just flat out against this project and maybe even trying to sabotage it, or trying to undermine the success. And actually that sort of resistance is a lot easier to deal with, because it's so obvious and it's easier to deal with it directly head on. The more common, I'd say 95% of change management issues are more subtle. It's not that people don't mean well, because I think most employees and most organizations mean well. They want the company to succeed. They generally see the need for change. So it's not a matter of do they see the need for change. It's what happens when you start messing with their lives. What happens when you start changing their processes, their roles and responsibilities. For example, you start automating the job of someone who's spending, say, 50% of their time is spent in Excel spreadsheets, going out and tracking down manual data, crunching it in a spreadsheet and spitting out some kind of report. If that's half my job, and then now you're going to roll out technology that sounds good to me in theory, but now you're telling me you're going to automate that part of my job, suddenly I'm not quite as excited. Not because I don't want the best for the company, but because now I'm worried about myself. I'm worried about, am I going to have a job? What am I going to do? Certainly I can't have a job or stability in this company if half of my job is going to go away. I mean, that's the way I start thinking. And so I might start resisting things a little bit for that reason, or because I take pride in that spreadsheet that I created and have used to manage my job, and now you're taking it away from me. For those two reasons, those are very subtle things that are going to trigger some sort of resistance. And it might be that I just start to second guess the technology that's being deployed, saying, oh, see, it can't do all the things my spreadsheet can do. and therefore we need to find a way to get that software to do what my spreadsheet could do. And then you start talking about customization and stuff like that. That's a whole nother rabbit hole and whole nother discussion. But that's just an example of how that person could mean well from day one, but then you start changing their lives. And that's just one individual example. You take that times however many dozens or hundreds or thousands of employees you might have in your organization, and you have that many issues that start to accumulate, that creates change management resistance. And that's pretty powerful, and it's hard to see. So back to your point of how do you anticipate that, a lot of it is understanding the culture of the organization, because a lot of times it comes down to the culture of, weaknesses and strengths of any culture. So for example, if you're a organization that has communication issues from between different departments, let's just say you're operating in silos and there's not a lot of cross collaboration or communication between departments, that's a sign that chances are in the future that's gonna create tension when you start to talk about integrated workflows and common operating models and things like that. So that's an area we know we need to focus on, this whole concept of cross department communication and collaboration. That's going to be a change management issue that we need to create a plan and strategy for that's specific to that specific issue. So people may not be saying it. Usually organizations don't say ahead of time, like, change management is going to be a problem because we're not very good at collaborating across departments. They don't generally think that way or anticipate that. They just assume that the technology will help fix the problem. So it's definitely a part art, part science. We use quantitative tools, for example, to measure some of the stuff, but we also use a lot of qualitative tools to understand and anticipate some of those things that, to your point, is difficult to do. It's not easy, but if you've done it enough times and you see enough organizations like we do or outside consultants do, that can be very powerful.
You said companies don't realize that they're not good at collaborating cross-departmentally until, they just think that the technology is going to help that. That reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. It's character shines through adversity. I don't know who said it, but that's my favorite quote. And I feel like that applies to this. I mean, adversity in this situation being a new change, something different, putting in a new technology. I mean, that's going to test you and test your limits as an organization. It might highlight some of the things that you're not very good at. So, I think it's important for leaders to be open-minded and self-aware as they go through this. And I think a lot of that plays into your change management strategy.
Yeah.
Based on what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another thing. Go ahead.
Just to say, every change strategy looks a little bit different too. Every organization is going to have a different strategy, different tactics. It's almost like, we've got these big change management toolboxes. We just need to pull out the tools and the tactics that are appropriate to any given situation. So it's another thing to note too. There's not a one size fits all answer for change management.
Right. That makes complete sense. I mean, just like there's not a one size fits all software for a company or multiple companies. So another thing too that you guys talked a lot about was benefits realization. And if you don't properly manage the change on the people side and kind of easing your team into adopting this new technology, you're not going to maximize your benefits realization. So I wanted to just kind of take a step back and talk about the benefits and kind of hear it from you with all of the clients that you've worked with, big projects, small projects. What are some of the leading benefits, of going through a transformation like this the right way and pouring into OCM and, doing your due diligence up front? Sure.
Well, you certainly have your typical benefits that people expect to see from a transformation. Things like, more automated and efficient business processes, better customer service or better customer journey or experience that you're providing to your customers, reduced inventory, increased profitability. There's a lot of tangible, measurable benefits that most organizations are expecting to see from their transformation. And if you do change management right, you just accelerate and actually help realize those benefits. So it's almost like it's not that change management gives you additional benefit. It's just that it removes the headwinds that block you from achieving the benefits you would expect to get from any sort of transformation or technology initiative. Probably the bigger one, though, or a big one that people don't oftentimes think about, and it's harder to measure and it's harder to anticipate, is not only the benefits realization, but even if you back up a little bit and just look back at what you were asking before about go live, what happens at go live, and what does our company look like, our organization look like at the time we go live? Is it going to be a total chaotic disaster where people are just freaking out and there's a bunch of fire drills and we can't ship product, we can't close the books? That's the type of environment that companies find themselves in a lot in the short term after a go live, and that takes a toll on an organization. I mean, it totally undermines all your expected benefits that we just talked about, but it creates morale issues, and you start to burn people out, and people start to doubt and second guess leadership and all that stuff. So there's a hidden benefit there in the short term, and that benefit is actually very large, because if you think of all the money that can be lost from a disruptive go live in terms of lost sales orders or shipments you can't get out the door, or whatever, you can't close the books, or you can't collect money, that's another big one, or you can't pay your employees. That happens sometimes. I mean, any of those things can be catastrophic, and change management is designed to help mitigate those shorter term, but I would argue can be even bigger benefits or lost benefits in the case of the negative situations.
Right. So it's a huge topic. I know Tammy called it the teddy bear of digital transformation, but it's only because you can't see it or touch it, but it truly is so important. It makes or breaks your project. So definitely an important conversation.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. And while she may have referred to it as a teddy bear of transformation, it's important for executives not to think of that or mistake that for being touchy-feely or optional or nice to have, because it is so critical to transformation. I think just so many companies, it's amazing. It astonishes me actually how many organizations think it's just a nice to have, or they think, we're doing change management, we're training people. What's the big deal? We're communicating, we're sending out emails, we're going to train them right before go live. Everything's fine. But that's just scratching the surface of where change management comes in. So yeah, definitely an important topic for sure. So good. Well, that was a good discussion, and thanks to Tammy and Sarah for powering through some technical issues there and having a good conversation with us. Excited to have our next guest on. We're going to have Daryl Crockett, who's our Vice President of Data and Security at Third Stage Consulting. We're going to talk with her about women in leadership, or more specifically, you're gonna kick me out of the room while you talk to Daryl about women in leadership, because I have no role in that conversation, I suppose. But I'll crash the party after you're done, and we'll have a conversation after that. So we're going to bring Daryl back here in just a second. And actually, real quick story before you bring her on. I don't know if you know this or not, but I actually met Daryl several years ago, in all places, in Copenhagen, Denmark. So we were both speaking at a conference there, and we're both from the United States, but we ended up meeting in another country. And it was an industry conference, so it's not surprising that we shared some common interests or whatever. But I just remember I was still jet lagged. It was the first day I was there, I think, and came down for breakfast at the hotel, and it was just packed, and there was nowhere to sit except I saw one lady sitting at a table with one seat open, and I asked if I could sit with her, and happens that she's from the United States. And long story short, that's how we met. And she's a really good person too. I'm excited for this conversation because she has a really interesting personal story, professional story. She's a very gritty person. She just has a lot of determination and drive, and I think she's a great candidate or a great person to talk about women in leadership. So I'm excited to hear what comes out of the conversation with her. So we'll come back with you and Daryl Crockett in just a second. We'll be right back. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
And it feels so good, it's like walking the glass. It's so cool, so hip, it's alright. It's so groovy.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome, Daryl. We're excited to have you on today's episode of Transformation Ground Control. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here.
So we have an interesting conversation today, and it's specifically around women in leadership. And, I figured who better to join me in the hot seat than you. You have a very impressive resume. You've started a handful of companies. Right now, you are serving as the VP of Data and Security at Third Stage, but you're also CEO and president of Validatum. And I think, just your story will be very captivating. So I want to start at the top and just learn a little bit more about what does your role look like today? What are your responsibilities, both on the day-to-day function level and as a leader? So tell me a little bit about your role today.
Yeah. So my role, I think, is a very, very multi-level role. At the highest level, my purpose is really to make sure that Third Stage is engaging in dialogue at all levels of sales and delivery about the important topic of data. And that is a big job because not everybody thinks about data in the same way that perhaps I do and other data people do. So it's a matter of educating the entire Third Stage organization to understand what types of activities, questions, deliverables should they be weaving into their day-to-day jobs that they're doing. And I think that on another level, down from that, engaging with customers, potential customers and existing customers about their needs, about their issues, and trying to educate them about the importance of data and even sometimes the specific bits of data that they should be thinking about in their projects that they have going on. And then I'm also involved in individual projects and helping to identify areas where a customer might need to focus, where we might need to bring in some additional expertise regarding data or security. I'm always looking to be engaged at everywhere from the highest level of disseminating and evangelizing about the importance of data down to the nitty-gritty with specific customers about specific data needs that they might have.
Right. So you're really kind of spearheading the whole concept around data security. Is that
and
does that
data management and data management? Yeah, I think that's really a lot of it too. Is we need to understand what we're doing with our data, what we need to be doing with our data, how our data behaves within our system, and then, like you said, how do we protect that and how do we share that data securely? But everything else is, frankly, there's a lot more work about how companies use their data than it is about how they protect their data.
Got it. And I mean, if you think about any ERP system or CRM system, you have the system and that's the skeleton, the framework, but what makes it work for any business is the data. So you could argue that this is literally the meat of any digital transformation is how is the data handled? Is it being productive and helping you kind of on the business intelligence side of things too. So definitely a big job. I mean, if you're the point person kind of leading that conversation and making, your clients be aware of the full scope when it comes to data integration, I mean, I think that's huge. So I want to kind of pivot and look at where did you start in your career? Because obviously right now you hold a big responsibility in making sure that the clients are going to be successful when it comes to managing their data, right? So where was point A for you? Where did you start in your career?
It's really interesting because very early in my career, it seemed like I was gravitating toward systems implementation. So I really can't remember ever having a role that didn't involve some aspect of putting a new system in. So I seem to have expressed a talent in that area early on, and therefore would get those roles either because I sought them out or people within the organization I was working for would recognize that I had experience or talent in that area. And I used that as a way to leapfrog up and step up and then leapfrog up through accounting roles, through finance roles. So, first I started out, I was just a lowly analyst, and then we had to put in a system implementation, and I did that, and then I said, oh, well, would you like the job to run this? And I'm like, okay. And then I did that all the way up, going from company to company and project to project, all the way to CFO of a public company, of a NASDAQ company. And so I just was on the project as they were going through a merger, and there was a gap, and I had been working at the controller level. I had worked my way up through projects, bigger and bigger projects, and I got that opportunity. And from there, I got to move over as a chief financial officer, working on an IPO for a technology company, for a data company, actually. So that was fantastic. And then I had a life-changing event where my husband passed away, and I had to take a job, or change careers, really, and do something that gave me a little bit less global traveling, a little bit less of unpredictable hours, and I went into doing a data consulting. I don't really know how I ended up there. I just ended up there, and that was a good place for me to be while I was raising my family. It was a great job. I learned a lot. I liked it, and I was good at it. And I started to build new methods and approaches that I used in conjunction with, say, Accenture teams that were on the project with me. And I kind of grew a practice area around data migration and data validation inside of large ERP implementations, global ERP implementations. And even though I was raised by kids, I did still get to travel to some amazing places along the way. South America. I've got to go to South Africa, certainly Europe, and that was fascinating to be able to do that as part of it, and see how companies around the world in their satellite offices are operating differently, the different customs, the different considerations that there were for each of those cultures. And I brought all that back, as well as a very high respect for the differences between our cultures, and the fact that, we as Americans, if we're doing implementations, that we are not the center of the universe, that there are every country thinks they're the center of the universe, and we need to listen and be respectful and incorporate global requirements if we're working on global teams. So I did that a lot, working, doing migrations and implementations as a PM for these large ERP global ones. And then I started to specialize a little bit more in HCM. So I did some HCM projects. I started to work more in integrations, where we're bringing major systems together, and we really need to think about what is the process for merging this data, for passing data along between these different systems. So it kind of started again in the ERP implementation, and then graduated into the integration aspects of that. In other words, hey, we've got an HCM system, we like it, we want to keep it, but then we also have another system for managing our manufacturing execution, our MES. And we use employee data there. How are we going to get the employee data from our ERP system or our HCM system into this other system? How do we bring that together? And started to work more on that. And I don't think it was until GDPR when I really started to realize that there's this whole other world of aspect. It's not a world. It's another aspect of the same data that I've already been playing with and touching and dealing with for all these years. All these business systems connecting customer data, sales data, vendor data, emails, and this data set and data lakes, all of this stuff. I've been dealing with this for a really long time. And when you talk about the privacy of certain data and the protection of that data, we're still talking about the data. It's just a different perspective or dimension of that conversation. So when GDPR started to come into view for Europe, I started to recognize that this was an area of expertise that would be quite easy for myself to learn and slide into, because it was still based on, like I said, that same data. And I was right. And that was a great place to be. And it has really led to a great opportunity to add value in one of the most critical areas these days of running a business is how do we comply with new regulations for our data, and how do we protect that data to protect not only our interests as a company, but also our customer data or our vendor data or our employee data that might be sitting within those very systems that we have in our company.
Wow. You're a wealth of knowledge. I mean, we could just say that based off of that response. I think it's interesting, to look at how you started. So you started as an analyst, and then it was these projects and these opportunities that came up that equipped you with this knowledge, right? And it's that has brought you to this point today. And I think it's important for people who are aspiring to become leaders is, people are, especially younger people within the workforce, they're wanting that leadership role. They want it because of the responsibility, maybe because of the money, but it comes with so much. It comes with more responsibilities, right? It comes with more at stake. You have to always be available for your clients and make yourself kind of that subject matter expert so that you can lead them across the finish line in these different topics that you're good at. And, hats off to you. I think from the very beginning of your career, you dialed in on what you were good at, which was systems integrations, and it grew from there. So, I think that plays a lot into probably how your leadership style is, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious a little bit about, the thought. There's two different ways that you could approach leadership. One being, the job, but you're really managing people. And if you grow the people, then the people will grow the business. And then the other side of the conversation is lead from the front, work in the trenches, kind of lead by example. So how would you define your leadership style and your leadership philosophy in relation to that spectrum?
I think as a leader, you're certainly tasked with getting things done. That your job is to take the team that you've either inherited or that you've built, or even that you're showing up and it's your client team, right? Is taking them from where they are today through a set of activities for the achievement of a goal. And I think that should, if you want to stay in business for for a long time, you have to keep that as your primary focus. Our job is to get from here to there, or do this set of things and make sure that whoever the stakeholders are happy. At least in my line of business, that's the way it is. And so that's what you have to keep and bear in mind, because if you don't bear that in mind, then you risk that you won't achieve your goals. So I think that always has to be kind of standing on top and going like, we're going over here, and being able to communicate that. That being said, there's two things in that two elements to that are nuances, is that you need to be constantly looking to make sure that you're going in the right direction. And I think that when you're so focused on achieving a goal, like you have to be, it's easy to just make a plan and execute against the plan and measure your success against that plan, only to realize at the end that in the middle of it, something changed. And because you were so focused on the plan, you did not address a critical change that was there. And therefore, you continued on a trajectory that now maybe has changed, the goal has changed, but you did not make that adjustment because you weren't watching. So by virtue of the fact that you're focused on where you're going and very task oriented to a degree and getting the team to achieve it, you have to continually, like, I'm standing on my feet here, stand up and look out. Am I still running the team in the right direction? I know this is our plan, but does our plan still make sense? So there's a lot of repeated activity that has to take place, repetitive activity, to constantly check your bearings. Are we going in the right place? Does our plan make sense right now? So I think that's one super important element that I like to make sure that I point out when I'm talking about leadership. Because, if I don't stand up and look and see that change until 2 weeks after it was apparent, and I've now wasted 2 weeks, going in the wrong direction. It's like saying, hey, we found out there was a detour on the road ahead, and we waited until we got there to realize we now had to backtrack to go to this other place. We need to be checking that kind of GPS, working with stakeholders, working with whatever's available to us for information to check and see, do I see something ahead that makes me think we need to replan right now?
Right. And that's applicable, I think, across the board. I mean, if you look more specifically on a digital transformation project, whoever is spearheading that project and the main point of contact, they need to be able to course correct. And oftentimes we talk about creating the business plan and project mapping at the very beginning so that you know what the guardrails are, and making sure that as you continue on the project, you're course correcting as needed to make sure you're on track. It's exactly what you're saying. And that's also obviously applicable to just how you run your team, how you run your business strategy in general. Absolutely applicable. So I'm curious too, if you have, I'm sure we have a handful of listeners who are already either in a leadership role or they're aspiring to grow into a leadership role. What would you say are the most important attributes or skills that a leader should have that would help them kind of do what you just discussed?
To be aware of what's going on, I think you have to be a great listener. You have to listen to when people signal that they're uncomfortable or that they have information. And being in leadership, a lot of times people will not express their honest feelings to you because they're maybe subordinate to you, or they really respect you, or they're afraid of you, whatever it is, right? Or it's not their role. So they'll signal, though, that there is some dissension in their mind. And if you're not listening for that, if your ego is too big to recognize that not everybody in the world is going to agree with you, you can start to hear or ask for more input from people, and honest input, to make sure that you're getting all of the information that you could possibly get related to what might have changed or other factors that you may not have considered in your forward progress. So let me put it like this. If you are one person on a leadership role, but you have 20 people on your team, those 20 people are input gatherers as well, observers, have opinions. And if you, by virtue of the fact that you have a strict hierarchical approach to leadership, and people do not feel like you're approachable, and you do not solicit opinion without retribution, without consequence, as long as it's done respectfully, obviously, then you have now shut off the most valuable collection of information that you have to make you successful. Those people have brains in their heads, eyes, ears. They're doing activities and talking to people that you are not. And therefore utilizing that and creating an environment where people can express honestly their thoughts, their questions, their dissension, disagreement with you in a respectful way, to express alternative views, then you are just betting on the fact that you're omnipotent and you can think through every problem and see every problem, and you are going to have probably not as much success, and certainly not as good a working environment as you could. So that's one thing I'd like to say. The next thing I think is super important is I get really upset with the IT industry today, who has commoditized their resources. I'm disgusted by it. People are human beings and they have roles and tasks, but to think that we can assign the same work output, the same attributes and performance expectations to every resource just because of the role they fill, I think is ridiculous. And if time and time again, we see what we call the race to the bottom, with a selection of the least expensive resources and teams to do the work. And they'll go so far as to apply factors to that of inefficiency based on, where the country of origin is for the labor they receive, or an educational level, and completely miss the fact that they are dealing with dynamic human beings who are not fixed in their output, who are not always predictable in what they produce. So I would rather have people as leaders be looking at IT resources and people that are working on projects or working within organizations as being dynamic human beings with a set of skills and a set of weaknesses to some degree, but that they are that the output that you get from these people is to a large degree influenced by the leadership and the path and the course and set of expectations that are laid out for those workers. And if we set our expectations high, if we give people a sense of purpose and connection to the work that they're doing, and take some time to get to know them as individuals and to listen to what their fears are, what their challenges are, what their goals are, not only in the job, but also in their lives, we tend to see them be able to grow better and expand and improve their output capacity and improve what they can do and raise their level of skill, because you've given them a container that is much larger than the one that they're in, much larger than their existing role and task set. So if we treat IT workers and people on projects as commodities, plug and play, just get me another resource for that. You hear people say that, just get me another resource. Okay, so now I've put a resource in, and because I've treated it as a commodity, it has a container of what I expect, and that's helpful, right? Okay, it's helpful because I know I need this many man hours to do this. But they fail to understand that a highly motivated person can put out a lot more work for the same amount of work hours as somebody that is an unmotivated person. And if by the fact that we put them in that box so that we can count it and project it more easily, we are limiting our expectations of them, and that de-incentivizing them to grow beyond that container, to give us more than what we're asking for, because there's no economic or emotional incentive for them to do so. So I'd rather have us go through the tasks that we need to of assigning roles and picking people, but that once within that project, we are looking at them as dynamic human beings and working to help them and know them and challenge them to expand their capabilities within the role, and maybe even discuss opportunities outside of the role, but let's be myopic about a project in this case, and say, okay, within this, what ways do you think we can be doing this better? Are there ways that I, as a manager or leader, can help you do your job better? Oh, okay, you're saying that it's difficult for you to start at 8 o'clock and we have a staff meeting scheduled because that's the time when you drop off your daughter, and that's meaning it's hardship for you on the other end or causing angst for you. I get it. Let's do a poll, see if there's another time that we can have that would accommodate that. And that makes that person go from a terrible angst they feel every day trying to juggle dropping their kid off at daycare with this conference call that conflicts with the drive back home to their home office or whatever. And you've taken that for a simple thing because you listened and you asked a question. I mean, that's a simple thing, but how grateful then that person is, how much more incentivized they are to please and to do a good job because they were given something that cost you nothing to listen and address ways that you could make their job easier. Those kinds of things, that is capital, that investment in human beings, and that pays off. You do that across your whole team. You listen, you ask, you interact. How can we do better? What do you have for ideas? What challenges are you facing? What are you working on today? What's going on in your life? Those things can produce 10 to 20 plus increased output of activity because you've increased the space around their role, given them a set of expectations about being able to improve their own environment in some way, if possible. And now you add that up across everything that you're doing in your whole staff, and now you've got a rock star team. And I think we overlook that a lot, particularly in IT, in this commodity looking world. And because we're asking people to do mechanical things with numbers and data and systems, we fail to think about that we're dealing with dynamic human beings who can be influenced to do a better job if you invest in them periodically through the life of the project or through their jobs.
I'm so happy you say that because I feel like that's an area of opportunity for all businesses, for all leaders. I mean, if you're pouring into your employees and making sure that they are happy, you're going to get higher productivity. And I think both of those things that you said, number one, be a good listener, and just overall a good communicator, right? And that will open up the door for people to share more ideas with you, express what they're happy with, what they're unhappy with, and that trickles into treating them as humans. I mean, if you don't know that your employee is having a hard time balancing, the personal life situation with dropping their kid off at daycare with this conference call, you don't realize that that's hindering their performance. That's capping their creativity. If you nip that in the butt from the beginning, then you're obviously going to kind of open the bubble, enable them to go above and beyond. So I completely agree with that. So on that strong note, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be right back after this short message.
I've got the cash if you've got the heart.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Shake, shake like a wave. You're my work of art, and I want more.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I am here with Daryl Crockett, and we are chatting about leadership, specifically women in leadership, right? Daryl is heading up data and security with Third Stage Consulting. She started many of her own companies, and has a lot of great insights to share, both on the nitty gritty of the tech industry and the cybersecurity space, but also just what are the best practices around leadership. So I wanted to pivot, Daryl, to the topic of cybersecurity. We're obviously living in a totally new day and age. COVID has pushed everybody, or I would say probably 90% of people, to work from home off of their corporate networks, kind of opening up some more vulnerabilities, if you will, in the cybersecurity space. So tell me a little bit about the landscape today and how it's different due to the pandemic, and if you think companies are taking this risk seriously.
Ooh, big topic area. Okay, so let's go through the mechanics of how the pandemic has affected IT, cyber, and data security. As people moved from the office to their home networks and working on laptops and devices that were not on that corporate network, we lowered the bar for security because the personal networks and personal devices and personal laptops do not typically have the same levels of control and monitoring that are there on either corporate devices or when you're within that corporate Wi-Fi network or plugged in on a LAN per se. If you're sitting at a desk and you actually have a cord at your office desk, or did have an office and a desk, many of us may never have that again. So I think by virtue of that fact that if you can imagine that a corporation invests all this money in a building and chairs and tables and cubicles and all that network, that in that when you come into that and you're on that internal corporate network, that they're monitoring what you do and they have a lot more visibility into what is happening and a lot more control over what's happening within that environment. When we move outside and we're working from our homes, we're now on a Wi-Fi network that our kids are sharing with their devices, that we are working more off of our phones, that we are now only as good as the password that we have on our home Wi-Fi or cable modem or whatever we're dealing with. And that is something that is difficult to control from a number standpoint. When you're dealing with a corporate environment, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings or corporate campuses. When you're dealing with people working remotely, you can have hundreds of thousands of different environments now that you need to manage. And that need came so quickly that most IT departments could not adjust. Let's compound it by the fact that everybody working from home will periodically need some sort of IT help for connecting to a system, to a virtual machine, getting logged in, downloading something new. And in the corporate environment, this was all done by a centralized team and with a certain set of relatively limited parameters. Once we moved for everybody working on the home, IT staff is stretched so thinly because they have to deal with the mechanics of people working remotely and all the challenges just of getting their office to work in those environments, to get their regular, working software going. And that is reducing the amount of time they have to devote to security. So we've kind of not only made them do 1,000 times more, touch points that they have to go through, but we've also increased the risk by making all this happen outside of the setups that they had for protecting corporate data inside of one physical location. So it's really a huge double whammy. On top of that, we've got a natural acceleration in the market of the threats going from, the guy in the hoodie and the kid that's like flunked out of college and decides he's going to make money by stealing credit card information, to state-sponsored cyber war, and probably even worse, I would say, organized crime. So now the majority of what you experience is organized for data theft, hacking, ransomware. Most of that is coming from organized crime or from a state-sponsored profit center inside a country who is looking to increase their wallet and decrease the effectiveness and forced spending for their victim corporations. So we've had this very interesting, I don't want to call it a natural trajectory, but pre-existing trajectory of more sophisticated threats coming with large amounts of money backing this technology warfare, if you want to put it that way, and then combine that with now the increase in working in remote from home and decreased attention from IT departments. Now we've reached an amazing critical mass where we just assume that everyone now has bad actors in their systems. I think that's a great way to think about it, that the criminals are already within your systems. They're already in your laptops at home. It's just a matter of what they're taking today and when you'll find out that they're really there. And I think on top of it, even worse than that, as if it could get even better, is that, now we're looking at the cyber war from state-sponsored activity and state-funded activity, making targets of certain industries for the purposes of weakening a country's productivity and infrastructure. So we are seeing regular attacks on our electrical grids in the United States, our water systems. We are seeing attacks on our hospital systems and medical data. We're seeing attacks on our vaccine plants and our vaccine IP and clinical trials for agencies that do clinical trials for vaccines and development of that to steal IP or disrupt our response to this pandemic threat. Sick type of attacks that are meant to harm and are as dangerous to us as if you sent mortar shells or you blew up buildings. Imagine taking electrical grids down in the heat of the summer in the American South, where I don't know if you know this, but death from heat is probably one of the highest death rates of all natural disasters. Well, what if it's not a natural disaster? What if we take out all of the electrical grid or hamper it for Florida or Texas during the height of the summer, like a massive hurricane? And this is done, how many people does that kill? So we really have to think about that we all are potential victims of risk of this. And then as we work through the companies that support all of this, and whatever the role is and whatever project or company that you're working on, we need to start taking this seriously. You asked a great question. Are we taking this seriously? Are we doing what we need to? As Americans, absolutely not. I have a company in London. We're developing technology, some of my patents, and we've received a grant from the UK government too, actually now, to develop a better method for data security. And working with Europeans, working with our friends in the UK, and seeing the seriousness with which they approach data security, data privacy, compared to how we approach it here in the United States is shocking. And I think we're starting to hear some rumblings now that Washington is starting to take seriously the data security and cybersecurity and data privacy threats, and starting to move to that legislation. And frankly, I'm super excited about that because it's long overdue. And I think our approach to cyber viruses and cyber threats is not at the level that it should be here, certainly not at the business level. And I shouldn't have to be convincing people why they need to examine their cybersecurity policies, and do they have cybersecurity policies, and do they have compliance, any kind of compliance for protecting data that's within their organization. I have to sell that as something that they should be doing, and that's just simply not the case in Europe.
Wow. Wow, you make me want to build a moat around my computer with alligators.
Yeah.
That's serious. I mean, it's obviously, cybersecurity and cyber threats have been around since, the internet was developed, right? But it's crazy how quickly it magnified just within this past year because of the pandemic. So I guess now we could look at it, since people are working remotely. I was going to ask you, what are some simple things that businesses and organizations can do to protect themselves? But let's go down a level and say, what can individuals do to protect their laptops, their phones, whatever, at home on their own personal network? Because that also trickles into protecting the businesses that they work for. So what are some simple things that, I could do right now to help protect myself and keep these rats out of my laptop?
I'm sure that this doesn't apply to you, but one of the biggest things that you can do is do not go to adult content sites, period. Because that is where a lot of the, it's easy to get the malicious software in there, because you imagine that this is all coming from organized crime, typically, that these are bad actors to start with, in a lot of cases, and then this is just another vector that they have. And I've seen some really disastrous results from that, when people aren't realizing what they're doing. I think one of the important things that we can do, and I haven't talked about this recently, is that on every phone and probably device that you have, you've got an incognito mode that you have for searching on things. So one of the things that you can do is it shuts off your search cookies from being captured, and it leaves no trail where you've gone. So that's a great way to not allow people to see where you've gone, or for you to kind of put a container around the searching that you're doing. We can't overlook the fact that we don't necessarily know what Alexa is doing and Siri is doing. So think carefully about Alexa and Siri. I unplug mine for a lot of the day, because I don't want anybody listening. And I know we all feel like it's happened to us, but you'll be talking about something, and then the next thing you know, in a conversation with somebody, and the next thing you know, you see ads pop up on your phone about what you were talking about. And they say that it doesn't do that, but I think that when we have seen example over and over again of partner technology to the big tech giants, it's not necessarily them that is doing the eavesdropping or doing things with data, but it could be their partner. So why give people a chance? So think carefully about your smart home and what you say, and whether or not that's a risk that you want to take. Because frankly, I don't want to take that risk. It's too easy to hack into.
Wow. Okay. That's huge.
I
Good
know
feedback.
it is. I know, especially since they got rid of the home button. Used to be able to put when they had the button on the iPhones, you could push down there and then you would invoke Siri. She wasn't listening all the time. But now they've gotten rid of that. So the only way to get Siri, I think you can program one of the keys to hold it down, but it's awkward. There's really no way to get Siri to come up, and when I'm driving, that's so important to me. So I end up having to turn Siri on before I drive, so that I can dial or ask questions or voice to text, whereas I'm not able to do, and then I have to remember to shut it off after. And I think that's unfortunate. It just means that people leave Siri on and they're listening, and there's no kind of alternative to that to get your phone to function the way that you probably need it to while you're driving in a hands-free mode.
Right. Well, you heard it here first, guys. Make sure to do that today if you're not already doing that, just to protect yourself, you're protecting your family, you're protecting your business that you work with. It's just so important today. I mean, we live in a digital world, and it's time to protect ourselves in this digital world the right way. So I will definitely be doing those things. Thank you, Daryl. let's pivot a little bit. We have a couple more minutes left, and I want to dive into specifically your experience around being a woman in the tech industry. Obviously, this is, kind of a male-dominated industry. So I'm curious, has that phased you at all along your journey as you've grown into, a thought leader, a business leader, leading from the front line, in the cybersecurity space, in the data space? Has it even phased you, or has it been a challenge that you've come across?
I think it's not so much for outright discrimination as it is maybe an exclusion from a large network. Okay. So if you can imagine that maybe women represent 10% in the data field, maybe 15, that the other 90, 85, 90% is men who may socialize, may spend time together, may network together, that not that I can't go golfing with somebody, not that I can't, go to lunch with somebody, but it's just not something that is as comfortable, or I might not have access to that network in the same way that I would have if there were more women in there. So that being said, yeah, I think that if I'm not close to people, if I'm not spending time talking with them about, like we said, what are their thoughts, what are their challenges in their day, and those are my peers or my boss or boss's boss. I might not have access to those opportunities. So I don't look at it as some sort of overt discrimination. I just see it as kind of just an unfortunate lack of opportunity to socialize within a group that is what might prevent women from having being able to rise up in those ranks and be heard. I also think that our natural tendency to be polite, maybe not always women are polite, but to try to resolve differences, to not be maybe so controversial, to be considerate of other people's feelings, that might be a more female tendency to be. I'm probably going to get all kinds of hate mail on that one, but I think that we don't necessarily want to be initially very aggressive, and I don't think that that's something that men concern themselves with very much. They don't feel bad about that because it's just culturally, in our culture, it is not as attractive or appropriate to be an aggressive female. So that being said, is you tend to hang back a little bit, wait until you've got everything just right, and then you make your move. I had a good friend say to me, she said, I don't think that 6 months goes by where most of my male employees will come to me and say, hey, just letting you know, I'm starting to look around a little bit because I'm thinking that maybe the market's changing out there and there's some more opportunities, and I want to just explore my options for how I can increase my compensation. And they'll just walk in the office and say that. And she said to me, I don't think in 30 years I've ever heard a woman say that to me. So here she is having to give concessions to keep men that she thinks are worth keeping, who are suggesting that they'll go elsewhere if they don't get what they want. And if women never ask, then are we ever going to get that? And why is it that men ask and women don't ask? And I'm not here to understand the why, but I am here to talk about that, right? That is what holds us back. We need to not consider ourselves first to be polite, and second to be doing what we need to do for our careers and for what our needs are. We need to be much more vocal, not nasty, aggressive, but vocal about what we need. And I think that this kind of new change in the administration, I think having more of a focus on women and inclusion, I think is going to help us, because it is painful as it is, and we could say overblown or misdirected at times, it does at least start a conversation where we can maybe ask people or feel comfortable ourselves expressing things that we would like to see different and changed. And one of those big things and opportunities that we have here, Paresa, is that we can network together as women. We can help each other. So we might not have necessarily the access to that network or be as comfortable working in the male network if you're in a male-dominated field like data is, and I won't say ERP can be quite balanced, but data certainly is, in cyber. How can we work together? And that femtech and that kind of female networking, that's pretty strong. And I'm seeing that more and more and more, and I'm very encouraged by that. In fact, I'll put together lists and say, hey, go find the C-level suite and then give me the contact for the highest level woman you see within that organization, and I'll go to her. And she always answers my email. So, because it's so rare to see another woman in this area and that level, right? So I think we need to work that more. And I don't think it's bad or good. It just is. And if we recognize that there is a disadvantage just by sheer number and association, then how do we fix that? We fix that by correcting it, right? By looking for those connections and exploiting those correct connections to help ourselves grow our network, to grow ourselves professionally, and to help other women below us, right? Recognize that they need help too, and finding them and helping them up that step. Since we know how hard it was to get up there, we need to constantly be reaching down and helping those people too.
Absolutely. Be an ally, advocate for each other. I think those are such important insights. So thank you for sharing that, Daryl. I think, this conversation, we could go on for a whole nother hour, but we'll just have to save that for the next episode. So I really appreciate you joining us today on Transformation Ground Control. Thank you for your insights. So valuable. And we will see you on the next episode.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, where we go live on YouTube every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, 3 p.m. London, 11 p.m. Hong Kong. You can also subscribe to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to podcasts or watch podcasts, you can most likely find us there. So be sure to subscribe and listen. So the conversation with Daryl was very interesting, and it was interesting hearing you ask the questions, just because you don't know her as well as I do, and kind of coming at it from a fresh perspective. Really interesting. I mean, what were some of your favorite points, or some of the things that you thought stood out the most in that conversation that you had with her?
Yeah, I love that whole conversation. First of all, I think she has so many great insights, so I love talking to her about it, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with her in the future. But I will say one thing that really stood out to me was her calling out the point that leaders are getting in the habit of looking at people as commodities. And sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that human factor when you're looking at professionals or IT professionals specifically as kind of a plug and play into a job. If a coder isn't working out, you're going to get another coder, or, kind of approaching it in that mindset. And if you have these predetermined expectations, you're kind of capping people's creativity, which I just thought was absolutely accurate. I mean, I feel like you get the most out of people when you inspire that entrepreneurial spirit and encourage them to kind of do what they think should be happening, giving some guidance, obviously, as a leader, but also fostering that ingenuity. I think that is what really sets teams, companies apart. And it's a shame when you see leaders kind of falling back into that, everybody's replaceable mindset, because I imagine leaders that do this are going to see a high turnover if you're looking at them as just another commodity, not kind of fostering what they need both professionally and personally. I mean, why would they stay when they could go somewhere else and find that in a different leadership team? So I'm curious on your thoughts. I mean, you're leading this ship with Third Stage. Tell me your thoughts on that approach for, a company that has leaders that have that kind of everybody's replaceable mindset. What does the future hold for that type of company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can speak from experience on sort of the downside consequences of that. I mean, that's something that happened at my previous company, and part of the reason that we've talked about on other episodes, and I've talked about in other videos. Part of the reason why I left that organization that I started was because some of the new leadership and the ownership that we had brought in to help grow the company had that mentality of everyone's replaceable. These high-paid, difficult consultants that are hard to manage. We can replace you very easily, and it creates a high level of distrust. First of all, I mean, it's hard to trust one another when you're replaceable, and that your team members are replaceable, and everyone's thinking it and observing that. So it creates a high degree of distrust, and it just creates a really toxic, negative culture. And that actually was, in my opinion, the downfall of my previous company. And it was a hard lesson for me too, or in many ways. Not that I intentionally wanted that or expected to see that from the company I started, but that's where it ended up. And so I knew when I started Third Stage, I had to do things different. We've talked about the cultural aspect in other episodes. So I knew we had to focus on culture. And part of the culture we're trying to create at Third Stage that's actually very difficult in this industry is just creating a diverse group of people. On one hand, you want a common culture to where it's a very distinct culture. You're not all rowing in a million different directions. You're all, you share the same values, philosophies about consulting, the way you interact with clients. You want people that are aligned in that way, but you also want diverse people. So it's really it's a hard balancing act, especially in this industry where, it is male dominated. I mean, most people in this industry look more like me than more like you, and so or a lot of people that look less like a lot of people in the world. So how do you create a culture that kind of builds that diversity, but also keeps the common core, and you're heading in the same direction? So easier said than done, but it's a art that's lost, and it's an art that's very important to building any sort of team or company.
Absolutely. I think, too, it comes with experience and learning. If you're a leader that has that mentality, you probably don't realize that you have that mentality until, adversity comes your way, and then you become a little bit more self-aware about how you're treating your team and what impact that's having on your team and productivity, etc. So I think that says a lot. But yeah, I've experienced it as well as, on the other end of it is, are the leaders that you're working with understanding that, you have other personal commitments and maybe you're not able to join. I mean, I think Daryl made the example of joining this conference call at 8 a.m., but you can come in a little bit later and do, great work a little bit later and adjust. So I think 2020 pushed a lot of leaders because you had to be flexible. I mean, kids are at home doing schoolwork. I mean, doing, everything changed. So I feel like, again, we keep coming back to this concept of change and adversity, but, talk about adversity in 2020. I think this pushed a lot of leaders over that edge to hopefully be a little bit more flexible, understand their employees a little bit better so that they aren't necessarily putting them in these boxes, and hopefully driving more productivity as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just, and I think it makes it interesting for, makes for a more interesting work environment for people too. On one hand, you want to be around people like you, but it's also interesting and more rewarding, fulfilling to have diverse opinions and backgrounds and skill sets and things of that nature, for sure.
Right. Right. And talking about diversity, so one question that I asked her was about, what has it been like for your career, working in a male dominated industry? And she made a couple great points that, you don't think about often. She said, not in an intentional way have I been phased by it, but it's more so that natural progression of people, being drawn to like and like, so if, she could go golfing with the guys, sure, but is it a natural fit? Not necessarily. So that alone could play into how strong your relationships are built with your coworkers when majority of them are, of the opposite sex. So that's one thing. And then she also made a point that I think, is one of the more understandable, more commonly identified reasons of the difference is the concept of women speaking up, being aggressive at the table, etc. Is it pleasant to be an aggressive woman, and you're kind of in your own head as a woman thinking, I don't want to come off too strong and, offend this person. Whereas do men really think about that? It's kind of on a psychological level. So I'm curious. I mean, you are an ally, right? I mean, look at this show, right? You said you're outnumbered, right?
I think I am.
You are outnumbered. So I'm curious to get your insights. What would be, your advice to women who are looking to break into the tech industry or specifically grow into a leadership role within this industry? What would you say to them and how would you encourage them?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good question that I wasn't prepared for. Even though you prepared me for that question. No, it's a interesting thought because on one hand, and I'm thinking of Daryl here in her personality. So she's got, she's quite frankly, she's tougher and stronger than most men. I would argue. I mean, if you've worked with her, just her personality and her determination, her strong leadership. But and this is just my opinion. I don't know if other men that have worked with Daryl would agree with this, but I don't find it threatening. I don't find it abrasive. It's not, it doesn't trigger anything in that way for me. But I think to your point, a lot of women might worry about that. So I think, it's a good question. I think women have the advantage though of being able to temper that strength with the softer side that men don't have. And I think that's what makes them so good at consulting. I mean, that's what I know is consulting and technology transformation, all the stuff we talk about on the show. I think women are particularly good at it because they can, especially if they can walk, kind of straddle both sides of that. And it's hard to do. I know a lot of women that struggle with that. But if you can be strong and, have that, not be afraid to be as tough as a man or, I'm not talking physically, obviously, but just, mentally and the drive and all that stuff. But then you also have that softer side and the empathy and the, just the more relatable personality traits. I think that can be very powerful. So I think just finding that right balance and knowing when to, to dial up either side of that in different situations, I think that's a pretty powerful tool that trait that most men don't have.
I think that's big. I think it's, hearing you say that, and hopefully that falls on ears that needed to hear it, is, if you know your business and you know what you're talking about, you have the right intentions, etc., being confident in those ideas and bringing them forward is what's going to set you apart, and not swaying because of fear of what it might look like externally. So I think you mentioning that, I imagine there are a lot of men that feel the same way, that they aren't even thinking about that. And it's more so sometimes in, a woman's own thoughts that she's thinking about it and limiting herself in a sense. But, a lot of it, I think, plays into how is it received as well. So I appreciate you, calling that out and recognizing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if anyone that has worked with people like Daryl, I think you'd see that, she's good at walking that balance. She knows, she's very good at, and this, I'm coming back to your question, even though I'm using Daryl as an example. I think her and other effective female leaders, and I think this could apply to men too, if men would take the time to think about this, is if you kind of act like a chameleon in some ways and really read your audience and understand when you're maybe pushing too hard or if you're coming across as too abrasive, not that you just want to roll over and be spineless or whatever, but you can kind of throttle that back and maybe add a softer touch based on that. So I think a big part of what women are, and this is a broad generalization, so I apologize if it comes across as a stereotype, but women are generally better at reading people, I think, than men are. So if you can use that strength and say, okay, I'm a strong person, I'm trying to be strong, for whatever reason, this person is totally turned off by it or put off by it, and it's not working. You don't want to change who you are, but you can add more of the empathy and more of the softer touch to it. I think it's just a matter of navigating that. And if anyone's equipped to do that, I would think that women, are even more equipped than men to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it applies across the board. I think it all comes back to the concept of emotional intelligence. And, I think there's 5 pillars to emotional intelligence. Let me think back to my days in college in business management. I think it was empathy is one, self-awareness, self-management, and 2 others. But what you just said is spot on. I mean, self-awareness and empathy. And if you can read the room, it's going to improve the situation for everybody in the room. So definitely something to keep in mind as a leader, whether you're in the consulting world, IT world, finance, etc. It applies.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, and I know you had observations about this, is how she's not only is she is Daryl in an industry that is male dominated, but even within our industry, she's in a part of the industry that's super male dominated. When you talk about data and security, that's about as male dominated as you can get in our space. So it's interesting to hear her journey of how she started off more on the CFO side. So she kind of proved herself in the corporate America, typical corporate ladder type of advancement. She did very well there, and then she sort of jumped over into this side of the world that we're on, and was able to navigate that really well.
Right, I agree, and I think, it shows in what she's talking about. She obviously knows her business, she knows what she's doing. Just in my questions to her about cybersecurity, what can people on a personal level do these days? Because it all trickles into, if you're taking care of your digital space personally these days, then you're also taking care of the company you work for. So I'm curious, that kind of sparked a question in my mind. Obviously, it was way accelerated in 2020, kind of this threat of cyber security. But how has it evolved throughout your career, Eric? I mean, you've been in this industry for 20 years. The past 20 years, technology has just skyrocketed. So, how have you seen cybersecurity transition and evolve since you started in this industry?
Well, the frequency of outside hacks and attacks seems to have increased. I don't know if there's data out there that supports that or backs that, but I would suspect there probably is. It just seems like there's just a lot more to worry about now, partly because you have so much happening in the cloud to where it's a little bit more publicly accessible, or easier to get to. But then the common thread, I'd say the thing that hasn't really changed, but is still a significant risk or concern, is the whole concept of internal security. A lot of times people are more worried about closing off their systems to outside hacks, but you also have to worry about the security you do or don't set up internally with your systems to ensure that, if you've got a larger organization with tens of thousands of employees, there's a high likelihood that you have a couple bad apples somewhere in there, no matter how good your hiring processes are, your background checks, and all that stuff. So you do have to worry about, the people that might have access to create vendors and create payments and start, setting up fake invoices to pay themselves money or to buy themselves stuff. And, so you have to think about that those internal exceptions that don't happen often, but when they do, they can be pretty damaging. We actually had an interview on here a few weeks ago talking about the ERP failure at Queensland Health. And I don't know if you recall this, but during that interview, we were talking about how someone had spent about, I think it was $17 million on Gucci handbags and luxury goods for themselves, somehow with a flaw or a loophole in the system and the security, the way it was set up. They were able to buy all this stuff for themselves, and there was no control in place. And so it's stuff like that you've got to worry about, in addition to getting hacked by the outside groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere these days for sure. So I think Daryl said, I mean, she's been on our show before, and she's shared so much So many little things that we could each be doing, from changing our passwords to watching what websites we go on to, you know, all the other things as well. So definitely something to take seriously, especially today.
Yeah, and if that's a topic of interest to you and you're listening, if you want to learn more about cybersecurity and that whole thread, Daryl was actually on our very first episode, so episode 1 of Transformation Ground Control, and we had an interview with her just talking about cybersecurity. So go back and listen to that interview. It's a good one if you want to hear more from Daryl and or more about cybersecurity.
She's a wealth of knowledge, that lady.
She is. Yep, she's very, very smart. Well, good. Well, thanks for another great episode, Paresa. Thank you to our guests, Daryl, Tammy, and Sarah, for being on here today. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Again, we're live on YouTube every Wednesday. You can also find us on all the podcast platforms if you'd like to subscribe to us there as well. So hope you all have a great day, and we will see you next week on Transformation Ground Control.